tried to defile Nintendo, but EA unpaid slave trade.
While the rest of the industry was trying to gaslight you into thinking Nintendo Switch 2 was somehow a failure, in reality, EA has been going downhill for years. This is not a recent thing. This is not out of nowhere. This is not the only thing that's happened to them in the past couple of years. EA is finished. And nobody really wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to talk about how one of the most consistently anti-Nintendo companies in existence is now biting the dust. That they are now eating dirt. That the hornets of Hollow Nest are just tearing them apart because they are nothing more but a dead carcass. The EA thing has completely imploded, and it's not just due to their business practices, their lack of original IPs, their refusal to support Nintendo. It is because they are just pure scum. And I will be glad to see the day when people start acknowledging that EA is not and never has been a major player in the video game industry. But it's really easy to forget how EA sabotaged the Nintendo Wii U launch, because if you remember, they came out and said that they were going to be putting out a whole bunch of third-party support on the console. They announced Mass Effect 3, they announced like some sports games, they did all this stuff, and then they announced the Mass Effect trilogy on every other platform that wasn't a Wii U. Like, if you played Mass Effect 3 on a Wii U, you were playing a deliberately sabotaged, gimped port. Something that was fundamentally broken, something where a version of the game where you could not carry over save data from previous versions. There was no reason to play Mass Effect 3 on a Nintendo Wii U when you could have the Xbox 360 or PS3 version, right? Like, that was an intentional sabotage moment. Like, EA and other third parties deliberately threw out a bunch of late ports on Wii U with no real like advancements or improvements to deliberately undermine Nintendo, deliberately sabotage the console, and try to run the business into the ground. And we saw this during the Wii years, because the cope in the Wii era was that, like, well, we want to support the Wii, but we can't because the console is too underpowered. And then, like, Nintendo was just like, okay, fam, we'll just put out a more powerful Wii then. So they do that, and then the third parties don't show up. Like, that's just the reality of it. That's what actually happened. The Wii U, it had nothing to do with anything Nintendo did or the hardware or anything like that. It was entirely because third parties made all of these big promises for the console and then never really followed through with any of them, citing sales. And now that the Switch is the most popular video game console in the world, they not only have still not shown up, they have demonstrated that they would rather go out of business than allow Nintendo to take any kind of W. It's kind of embarrassing at this point, but yeah, EA is taking out like an insane amount of debt to purchase itself from like its shareholders, I think, so it can like go private, so it can sell itself like in full to like Saudi Arabia. So like EA is just selling themselves out to those guys. So like Nintendo, like, they own like a good chunk of like Nintendo as well. So honestly, like, this might be the purge of the gaming industry that we need when it comes to like purging SJW stuff, because Saudi Arabia doesn't tolerate that kind of thing. So like this very well may be like how woke culture in the video game industry dies, of just companies just selling out their woke dev studios to Saudi Arabia, and just them just religiously cracking down on like all this nonsense, and really just putting a damper on like all of their existing power structure and everything they've tried to do. Like, we'll see if that happens, because if anything, like, we haven't seen any changes at Nintendo of America after Saudi Arabia took their stake in the company. So we'll have to see like how this plays out. But Like, honestly, at the very least, we can expect to see some major changes at EA. Like, ever since they lost the FIFA license, they've kind of been on thin ice, and I suppose, like, the people who own the company, like, the executives are just anxious to get out. They know that the writing's on the wall, their business model isn't sustainable, Nintendo's taking over, they can't just bamboozle people by promising, like, Mirror's Edge sequels anymore. It's just like, what exactly what EA game have you played in the past 15 years that was worth anything? Like that's kind of my mentality on it. Like I can't remember a time where I was even interested in any EA game, even by accident. Maybe I was kind of thinking that like maybe I would buy Madden on like Switch 2 just to see what it was like and to make fun of it, but like in general, what is EA doing to like warrant any kind of interest in their company at all? Like they have always been an extremely exploitive, lazy company that exists purely by purchasing licensing rights of celebrities and pre-existing sports teams and just not knowing the first thing about video games. And this is the end result of that behavior is that they did not build a video game business. They did not build a video game empire. They built something that they could sell off to the highest bidder, and then skedaddle onto the next thing and to be a parasite somewhere else. Like that's kind of my mindset looking at this is that this is the end result for like every single one of these like major third party studios. The same companies that refuse to support the Wii U is that they spent their entire business model, enabling GameStop, enabling Xbox and PlayStation, enabling game journals, and like all of that is just kind of imploding. So all of these people are just bending over backwards, trying desperately to jump ship, to like pump up their stock prices, to sell off all their stuff, and then just move on to the next host, so they can leech off of that. Like that's kind of how I see this. Is that like nobody at EA cares about video games. Nobody cares about the IPs. Nobody cares about the employees there. No one plays any of their stuff. So like, why exactly is this big news? Outside of the fact that another big AAA studio has now been bought out and it's clearly on the decline because you just can't hide it anymore. People brush the whole like losing the FIFA license thing under the rug, but this is just something that you just can't ignore. The reality is all these big corporations that like tried to oppose Nintendo back in the day, they're folding, they're going under. And without them, Xbox, PlayStation, and Steam cannot maintain any relevancy whatsoever because without software, there is nothing to play on your box. So at the very least, you won't be seeing EA Sports in the future. At the very least, you won't be seeing as much enthusiasm towards like EA products. You won't be seeing as much hype. You won't be seeing people like pretend that I don't know, like Andromeda is gonna become like some big deal. Like oh, the next Dragon Age that'll salvage BioWare. Like it's it was embarrassing. And honestly, even back in 2014, like 2014 when Jeff Keighley gave Game of the Year to Dragon Age Inquisition, like the writing on the wall was on the wall even back then. Like nobody cared about EA. Nobody cared about what they were doing. Nobody was hyped for their products. Like they weren't that big of a deal. And yet we were told that these were the biggest games in the industry because they were the most progressive, they were the most woke, they were the ones that were supposedly like these huge success stories. And yeah, it just completely imploded. Like to date, I don't think Inquisition has even become a million seller. And honestly, I kind of feel the same way about its follow-up, Baldur's Gate 3. Its spiritual successor. The same group of people trying to sell you on this idea that this RPG is somehow like some like evolved like amazing thing when it's just the same thing we got a decade before. There are like endless examples of this kind of thing. There's a lot of companies that need to go under before I'll be satisfied. But this is a very glorious step forward in the Nintendo revolution. Another one of Nintendo's critical enemies, arguably the biggest there is, has completely collapsed. Without EA, without them restricting sports game access to Nintendo consoles, one of the big major roadblocks to getting people to try Nintendo games, the lack of sports games, has finally, after 30 years, finally been destroyed. Because this is something that they were doing even back in the Super Nintendo era, with their favor of Genesis and Sega products over theirs. So Nintendo has defeated another one of their enemies, and it remains to be seen just who is going to be next.